Good afternoon, and welcome to Juniper Research's Top 10 Tech Predictions for 2020 webinar. I'm Nick Maynard, Lead Analyst at Juniper Research. With me today I have Principal Analyst Elson Satanto and Lead Analyst Sam Barker. So, before we talk you through our top 10 technology predictions for 2020, we're going to start by assessing the results of some of the predictions that we made for this year, for 2019. Then after the predictions, the webinar will conclude with a quick question and answer session. So to begin with, a brief introduction to Juniper Research and our predictions. So Juniper Research specializes in identifying and appraising new high-growth market sectors within the digital ecosystem. We provide market research and content across over 50 technology markets. These research reports form the basis on which our expert analysts make all of these predictions. Now, for the past 10 years, we've been bringing out a set of our end-of-year predictions in which we look at the key technologies, devices, and services that we expect to have a disruptive impact in the next year. We look at what legislative changes are planned, future products in development, and which technologies are anticipated to be front and center at key industry showcases, such as CES and Mobile World Congress. We also speak to movers and shakers in the industry across really a wide range of verticals to discuss their opinions and any upcoming announcements or expected developments. Our analyst team then whittles down a really long list of probables and into a much shorter list of possibles into a shorter list of probables, which are then ranked on their overall likely impact in 2020, and that gives us our top 10 list. For this webinar, we've put together a couple of slides on each of the trends, and for each trend, we'll be exploring 4 key aspects. What is the opportunity? Why in 2020? Who will benefit? And lastly, what do we predict is going to happen? Where relevant, we've also included the title of existing Juniper Research reports in the area in question on the second of the 2 slides per topic area, so you can see what coverage we have. When my colleagues and I have run through the list in reverse order, we'll be answering a few of your questions. You can send your questions to us while the webinar is in progress. Please use the chat box that you'll see on screen to type your questions and send them to us. Any questions that we're not able to answer during the webinar will be addressed via email afterwards. Before we go through this year's predictions, I'd like to take a look through a few of our predictions for 2019. In most cases, we believe our predictions really hit the mark, although in some instances, the scale of the activity was particularly noteworthy. Now, firstly, we predicted that AI would become crucial to edge computing, and indeed this has become the case, with many vendors launching AI-enhanced hardware for edge use cases. We also anticipated that banking as a service would see a new economy emerge of API-connected solutions, and this has happened with certain digital-only banks, but it will really take 2020 for this to reach its full potential. RCS messaging has launched in many cases, with Google actively bypassing operators to enable its rollout. And 2019 has also seen significant deployment of blockchain in the food tracking area, with commitments from major food industry players and supermarkets. And our prediction around loot boxes has largely held true as well, with regulatory interventions, particularly in Europe. So that just brings us to what does the next year hold in store? To begin with, I'd like to introduce my colleague Elson, who will lead you in with number 10, voice assistant security concerns to come to a head, causing trouble for smart homes.
Thanks very much, Nick. And so with this number 10, voice assistant security concerns to come to a head, causing trouble for smart homes, what do we see here? Well, we see that voice assistants are becoming highly important in the smart home ecosystem, fueled by a battle by the main voice assistant vendors, Amazon and Google primarily, to sign as many smart home partnerships as possible. Crucially, voice assistants, usually in the form of smart speakers, provide an important interface mechanism to the smart home, circumventing complex app experiences. However, voice assistants have come under much criticism of late, in particular for the potential for employees to access user recordings and queries, causing significant privacy concerns. In April 2019, Amazon admitted that staff listening to samples of voice assistant conversations with users in order to improve speech recognition. In July 2019, Google also admitted that it operated the same policy with its assistant, with many conversations found to have been recorded accidentally. As such, the important role these assistants are playing in the smart home is under threat. While many devices offer the ability to disable microphones, user trust is in serious jeopardy, which is a critical issue for both voice assistant vendors and smart home manufacturers. This is important when voice assistants are looking to play a role in further areas, including in cars and in consumer robotics devices. So, why do we think 2020 will be the year where concerns around voice assistants will come to a head? Well, we think this for a range of reasons. First, the regulatory landscape in multiple jurisdictions has become much more privacy-centric, particularly with the advent of the GDPR in the EU. California has also passed its Consumer Privacy Act, which contains provisions that include the need to obtain parental consent for collection of data of minors under 13, the ability to opt out of the sale of data, and mechanisms to submit data access requests. The chances of further regulatory provisions across multiple jurisdictions is high, given the prevailing environment. Secondly, specific concerns around voice assistants and how the data is accessed, how the data is stored and used have been raised throughout 2019 this year, with much concern in the media and by politicians around the level of access these vendors have and how they control this access. Thirdly, the overall atmosphere, particularly for regulators, is to challenge the growing influence of technology companies through regulatory means at their disposal. The Cambridge Analytica scandal, for example, was the first of many events which have attracted regulatory scrutiny. Google has had significant regulatory problems in Europe in terms of antitrust, as has Apple with state aid in the Republic of Ireland. Recently, Facebook as well has been in the limelight with many concerns around its backing of the Libra cryptocurrency project. These factors collectively or together mean that there is a serious challenge to voice assistant vendors with their role in the smart home, particularly vulnerable. As such, they will need to take serious steps to address these concerns in order to sustain overall growth. Now, what changes will this bring and who will benefit? Well, what we see is that voice assistant vendors will primarily take two measures to address these concerns in this area around privacy. The first is that voice assistant vendors will be made to set clear and transparent rules around data sharing, who can access what data and for what reason this is, and this will be highlighted to users. In turn, this will reduce the overall concern and highlight issues to users who may not be aware of the challenges. Secondly, smart speaker and smartphone manufacturers will design more processing power into their devices, enabling much more data processing to happen at a local level. And this will remove the need for data to be shared on such a scale, reducing these issues significantly. There are two main groups that will benefit from the changes: consumers and vendors. Consumers will benefit from a much clearer relationship with vendors, with clear and transparent understanding of what their data is being used for. They will also benefit from reduced latency in devices, with more queries handled at the local level. For vendors will benefit from reduced regulatory and media concern around their operating practices, enabling them to pursue smart home and automotive partnerships at scale. And finally, Juniper research predicts that this rebalancing in the voice assistant market will enable smart speakers to become central to the smart home, significantly enhancing the ecosystems which vendors have sought to build. And indeed, we believe that this will drive the use of around 180 million voice assistants for the smart home control in 2020. And now moving on to our next prediction on number 9, consumer robotics to launch using subscription models. Here, what we see is that the past 18 months have been highly challenging for the consumer robotics market. There have been several high-profile manufacturer failures, with 3 proving particularly noteworthy. Anki, which manufactured Cosmo, Vector, and Overdrive, had built significant presence in the market. It raised $182 million in venture capital funding since it was founded in 2010. And Anki reported that it was approaching $100 million in revenue in 2017. However, it closed its operations in April 2019, citing insufficient funds to deliver its long-term roadmap. Jibo, which created the Jibo social companion robot, also had made progress in this market, delivering a device which many users made a part of their homes. This was propelled by over $70 million in funding over its 7-year lifespan. However, earlier this year, the company shut down, leaving the devices unsupported. Mayfield Robotics, another example, is a maker of the Curie home robot, and it shut down its operations in late 2018. And this was due to Bosch, its parent company, deciding that the product was not a business fit. If this was not enough, Sphero, the manufacturer of the highly successful BB-8 robot that tied in with Star Wars: The Force Awakens, recently pulled out of entertainment robotics, choosing to focus on educational robotics instead. So why name these examples and what brings them together? Well, the key reason is failure in each case, in that there was no recurring revenues generated by any of these vendors involved. The purchasing model was highly transactional, with customers purchasing one model, then not making any other further purchases. This is highly challenging for the vendors, as these devices require an app for an interface, which has upkeep and ongoing development costs, and as well as has research and development costs for future models. With no recurring revenues to offset this cost, robotics manufacturers have struggled. However, there is hope for the market. Subscription models have proven their worth in other markets and have gained broad consumer acceptance. As such, robotics manufacturers will bundle devices, ongoing cloud-enabled capabilities, and content to generate a more reliable revenue stream. We think that this will happen in 2020 for several reasons. The rise of subscription models has been a defining feature across many markets over the past few years. What started in content, primarily audio and video, has now begun to touch many different industries and markets, including everything for e-commerce, reward schemes, leisure, and transportation. Indeed, the smart home market has already shown that subscription models can work for devices. Many smart home vendors offer subscription packages that enable app control and cloud-powered capabilities, such as security camera recording. This can be applied to the robotics market with likely great impact. So, who will benefit from this trend? The primary beneficiary from this change will be the manufacturers themselves, we believe, with additional benefits for end users. Manufacturers will benefit from an ongoing stable source of revenues, which can be leveraged to support the development of content and further R&D for new devices. This in turn reduces the pressure on new robotics devices to individually perform in terms of cell numbers, somewhat obviating the cyclical nature of the market to date. Also, by introducing a more sustainable stream, vendors will not have to rely on commercial licensing partnerships, such as film tie-ins. While these have led to temporary success for some vendors, when these vendors fail to repeat the success, this causes major problems. End users as well will benefit from enhanced features that manufacturers can build, as well as better app experiences, which will improve over time. Ultimately, end users will benefit most significantly from a more stable industry, which reduces the likelihood of the user being burdened with a device that is no longer supported. So, this trend will see business models in this market fundamentally change, with a completely new approach taken by major manufacturers. This will enable greater sustainability for manufacturers, and it will mean that consumer robotics are supported by frequent updates to content and will generate opportunities for partnerships in the smart home ecosystem. There have also been signs that major consumer electronics manufacturers, including Sony, LG, and Samsung, are becoming increasingly interested in this market, and these trends are examined further in our recent Consumer Robotics Research Suite, which contains insight across this market. And now I hand over to my colleague Sam Barker for point 8.
Thank you, Wilson. And our 8th point is that the Huawei and ZTE ban will result in more uneven 5G network growth. Following the lead of the US, a variety of countries have decided to ban Huawei and ZTE from being part of the emerging 5G network infrastructure. This has either been through outright company-level bans, as we have seen in the US, Australia, and Poland, or through the prohibitions of specific parts of the network, such as the UK. This has been particularly focused on Huawei, but restrictions on ZTE are increasing as well. Several companies, most notably Deutsche Telekom, have declared that these bans and strategies to restrict Huawei's and ZTE's involvement in the 5G equipment market will severely limit the ability of many countries to deploy 5G infrastructure. With less competition, prices for 5G network infrastructure will be higher in countries where the Chinese vendors are banned or restricted in their operations. With the initial proof of concept 5G networks deployed, 2020 will be the year that truly nationwide deployment efforts emerge, and the questions of value will come into play in a way they haven't to date. As a result, the biggest impact of the bans will land next year. The ban will have its biggest impact on those operators that are more concerned about securing value from their deployments rather than being the first to deploy. For example, Germany's spectrum auction was priced at over 6.5 billion euros, meaning budgets for deployment will be lower than expected already, and are thus more sensitive to any price changes. With EU security restrictions stoked by the ban, Germany's 5G rollouts will be much slower, with the effects felt through 2020 and beyond. Even once the initial networks are in place, the effects of any ban are likely to linger. If other equipment vendors can put in a good performance for their initial contract, then operators will be more inclined to remain with their initial 5G suppliers. While the presence of Chinese firms at a later date will accelerate the drop in prices, if they're excluded from initial deployments, then it will be relatively simple for other providers to aim to match them on price and lock them out of the market. Other network vendors, most notably Nokia and Ericsson, stand to benefit the most here, as they will not have to match Chinese vendors on price out of the gate. This will allow them to gain a strong foothold in key countries without the need to match more vendors on price. While this will result in a slower overall rollout, it will mean higher margins for the vendors that are still in play. It will, however, delay deployment to a degree, and as a result, 5G revenue growth will accelerate more in 2021, and we will see the highest growth in revenues from 5G services reaching over $20 billion worldwide, compared to the $5 billion we expected in 2020. For the areas where Huawei can be a full player in the 5G ecosystem, lower prices will accelerate the growth of the technology overall. We believe that this will result in a two-speed market, with those countries which accept the Chinese vendors having markedly higher levels of deployment than those that do not, thanks to the increased competition. Partial bans, such as the one the UK has proposed, will lead to a situation where the technology will have a similar effect on the overall market to a total ban. Being permitted to use chips on antennas will give Huawei access to a relatively commoditized section of the market, meaning the effects of increased competition will be relatively small. We also expect the bans to have a long-term impact. With Chinese companies excluded from these early deployments, they will have no opportunity to build up reputation for reliability in 5G markets. While their presence will force infrastructure prices down, by this point, other vendors should have reached a scale which means that they compete on price, essentially freezing them out of the 5G market for several years. And given the general lifespan of base stations and telecommunications equipment, we expect these differences in the market to persist through the 2020s. This is likely to have a bigger effect on ZTE than Huawei, who already have a larger slice of the domestic Chinese equipment market. And without the buffer of a comparably larger market that will not ban their equipment, we expect ZTE's business to suffer more from the ban than Huawei's business. And now back to you, Nick.
Thank you, Sam. So we're on to number 7, which is Google to leverage Fitbit health credentials to mount challenge to Apple Watch. So Alphabet's Google recently announced the acquisition of fitness leader Fitbit. And that was reported to be a $2.1 billion deal, which is expected to close in 2020. While the details of the acquisition haven't been released, we anticipate that Google will use this to release a new smartwatch in 2020. And this will mark the entrance of Google directly into the smartwatch market with its own brand hardware. So far, Google's presence in the smartwatches market has been restricted to its software solution, Wear OS, previously named Android Wear, which is running on other OEM devices. For example, this is the case with all of Fossil's licensed brands and was the case with Huawei prior to the Watch GT. While Google's impact on the smartwatch market has been lower than that of, say, Xiaomi, Samsung, Apple, or Fossil, we believe that the company has the resources to quickly capitalize on its acquisition, having been working on its healthcare solutions pretty intensively already. Combined with Fitbit's large presence in the fitness space, Google is already looking for ways to connect its Google Fit app to the Fitbit's Plus app. And this is not the first time Google has invested in healthcare-based smartwatches. Prior to this acquisition, Google already showed interest in health smartwatches by developing the Study Watch, which passively records a person's health data for medical research studies, especially related to Parkinson's disease. The company has also been in the media crossfire for having collected some health data on millions of Americans through a partnership with Ascension, which is a US not-profit health organization. We believe that Google is now ideally placed to build on the pool of talents it has acquired over the years. Now, these talents include Pebble, itself acquired by Fitbit in 2016, alongside technology from Vector, Coin, Fitstar, and Twine Health, which are allowing the company to release this new device in 2020. Furthermore, in early 2019, Google confirmed that it had strong interest in this area by acquiring $40 million worth of intellectual property relating to smartwatch technology, which was previously owned by the Fossil Group. Now, we believe that Google will now leverage its talent pool, development capacity, established brand name, and considerable financial resources to provide users with an improved ecosystem composed of better hardware, software, and features. So the release of a new smartwatch will most benefit Google, and this is really because it's seeking to dent Apple's market share and gain a stronghold in this market. Now, we can understand why the company wants to capitalize on this, because we anticipate that shipments will reach 166 million by 2023. And a good quality smartwatch would enable Google to attract customers who are frustrated by Apple's very closed ecosystem and eager to connect all of their Android devices. In addition to the market share, Google is also mostly looking to gain a considerable amount of data through the deal. Fitbit currently has around 28 million active users syncing their steps, their sleep patterns, or their meals even through Fitbit's smartphone app. While the tech giant declared that Fitbit's data will not be used for targeted advertising, it does not exclude the integration of the data for health studies, behavioral research, or other trials. This data will also feed into Google's robust database, which is already counting data from Google locations, activities, and interests, among other sources. Smartwatch users will benefit from a new device, which will have a better operating system. Wear OS has experienced setbacks recently, such as Huawei's decision to use its own OS in its latest smartwatch, the Watch GT, which we mentioned earlier. To date, only Fossil's licensed brands run their smartwatches on Wear OS, reducing the user share of Google to around 8% when compared with Apple gathering 34% of user share in 2019. While Wear OS now offers more intuitive navigation, with a smarter voice assistant and overall more user-friendly design than previous iterations, improvements are still needed when it comes to battery life, bug fixes, and the capability of fitness tracking offered by competing operating systems. We believe that the acquisition of Fitbit will enable Google to develop a more popular operating system, similar to the one that Fitbit are using on their current watches. And additionally, Google will be in a position to capitalize on most of Fitbit's solid user base. However, there will be concerns, particularly in the area of security and privacy concerns. And we've seen this in the Fitbit community already, with many users already warning that they will use a different smartwatch provider after the deal closes. So we anticipate that Fitbit's installed base will slightly decrease in 2020 when the deal closes. However, we anticipate the installed base of the Google branded smart Fitbit device will increase again in 2021. And with that, now back over to you, Sam.
Thank you, Nick. So our sixth tech prediction is that Google will expand its RCS services in Europe. So RCS messaging will provide enhanced features over the established SMS and OTT or over-the-top messaging services, such as WhatsApp and Fibre. And these include rich media and interactive consumer elements. However, as a messaging technology, RCS has repeatedly failed to meet its expectations in terms of handset and operator support, despite Google entering the market as an RCS profile provider. We anticipate that these rich media benefits will become particularly popular with brands and enterprise as they seek to develop new mobile channels to communicate with their customers. Capabilities for brand authentication and AI-based chatbot functionality, examples of services that will be of particular benefit to these players and business messaging users as the service becomes more established. Due to these new functionalities, we anticipate that RCS is primed for adoption amongst a number of industries, including banking, healthcare, marketing, and mobile ticketing. And we anticipate there will be the interactive and rich media elements of RCS that will prove the most popular in driving this adoption. Eventually, we believe that RCS-enabled messaging clients on smartphones will become the de facto mode of communication, with mobile apps becoming secondary channels. Additionally, RCS will create new revenue streams for operators, and we believe that RCS business messaging will create new traffic and will not take content away from the established SMS ecosystem. So why 2020? In response to the aforementioned slow growth, Google announced in July 2019 that it would begin to support RCS over its proprietary messaging app, Android Messages, in France and the UK. As a result, this bypasses the need for operator support of the messaging technology, and this has had significant ramifications on the market structure. Firstly, operators are losing out on potential revenues from RCS business messaging, and in a similar fashion to SMS business messaging, operators would be able to charge a premium fee over peer-to-peer traffic. Secondly, Google would drastically increase its position in the messaging market. It would be central to processing the message content, and this poses problems for the security of messages, given that RCS is not currently secured by end-to-end encryption, thus allowing Google to view the content of RCS messages. We expect Google can continue to expand RCS support over its messaging platform in Europe over 2020. However, the goal of Google's launches is to motivate operators in supporting RCS services in the future, and we do not believe that Google's own RCS services will seek to replace those provided by operators in the telecommunications ecosystem. Indeed, this strategy would provide similar hurdles that has faced the OTT business messaging market. Primarily, we're referring to the fragmentation of services. This would mean that brands and enterprises would not be able to guarantee that their message would be delivered in the rich media format of RCS, as not all mobile subscribers would be enabled to receive these RCS messages. Nevertheless, we believe that Google will push ahead with launching RCS in other European countries over 2020, given the high penetration rate of smartphones. The question is, who will benefit from Google expanding its RCS presence? Obviously, Google will continue to capitalize on the growth of their own RCS services, even if operators do not support the technology directly. However, we also believe that Google will view this strategy to increase its RCS presence in the long term, regardless of whether the service is underpinned by Google or mobile operators. This must be done by highlighting the benefits of the technology through its own app. However, this strategy will have drawbacks. Firstly, the app is not the default on a number of smartphone models and will have to be downloaded by the smartphone user manually. Given the lack of consumer awareness around RCS, this is likely to severely limit the actual usage of the service. Indeed, we don't anticipate that the inclusion of RCS will push Android Messages to become the default messaging app in Europe. Secondly, enterprise usage of RCS is also likely to be limited, as the largest brands and advertisers wait for the operator-led support. As a result, users may not see the full benefits of the technology over Google's RCS services. And the second beneficiary of this move would be the network operators themselves. If the move does increase awareness of RCS services, then operators are likely to benefit from RCS business messaging revenues in the long run. However, early mover advantage here is key. Despite the high prevalence of the wait and see approach, Operators who move early will be able to capitalize on partnerships with existing RCS and mobile messaging platforms who work with the brands and enterprise directly to offer these RCS services. But the question still remains if 2020 will be a high growth year for RCS. Whilst we are predicting the growth of RCS usage over the next 4 years, which is shown to the right, we anticipate that RCS growth will accelerate comparatively small growth in 2020. Indeed, it is the frameworks and ecosystem being put in place in 2020 that will drive future growth, including Google's potential RCS expansion in Europe. We expect these rollouts to happen where smartphone penetration is high, including countries such as Germany, the Netherlands, and Sweden, in order to maximize the potential of the technology. And if these launches do boost the perception of RCS messaging amongst end users, then operators will be keen to launch their own RCS services, thus benefiting from the business messaging revenues. We believe that the first industries to benefit from RCS services will be retail, banking, and the marketing industries. And now over to you, Nick.
Thank you very much, Sam. So now we're on to number 5, which is Netflix to seek out new revenue growth sources as competition rises. So in terms of the video streaming market, Netflix, while a clear leader, has repeatedly seen its competition intensify. Now, there are numerous parties vying for user adoption, and they're competing across both price and content offerings. While Netflix has traditionally only faced competition from Amazon Prime Video or Hulu, it is now challenged by an extensive list of services. These new challenges include Apple TV+, Disney+, CBS All Access, BritBox, and HBO Max, and that's really only a few of them. What is of more immediate concern is that the differentiation strategies that these new challenges are using are quite effective and how they reflect on Netflix's own strategy. For example, Apple TV Plus is attempting to create content that's high quality, uses recognizable household names. Disney Plus is aiming to leverage its unique back catalogue, and including the strong brands it holds. So that's many Disney films, Star Wars, and the Marvel universe. CBS All Access is leveraging key franchises, including Star Trek, to drive consumer adoption. In this context, Netflix's own strategy, which has become really a bit muddied of late. Traditionally, it's relied upon licensing a large amount of premium third-party content, but much of this has been restricted to use within separate streaming services. Netflix has pivoted to creating its own content, and it spent just over $12 billion on developing content in 2018, but it struggled to gain critical acclaim for its productions. In this context, the Q3 results showed net user additions in the US had really fallen behind estimates, alongside several rises in the subscription cost. These progressive increases in price have eroded the value proposition for users, particularly as these newer services have launched, in some cases, at lower price points. As a result of these pressures, Netflix will seek to find new and more sustainable sources of revenue growth in 2020 by producing more localized content and investing in sports content. So why will this happen in 2020? In order to revive its growth, Netflix is going to have to look for these areas which are currently underserved by its competitors. Accordingly, we expect that Netflix will focus on enhancing the quality of its TV content offerings in 2020, particularly those in emerging markets, and in some cases, by region within these markets via local languages. So by that, we mean offering locally made films and TV programs in languages like Hindi in India. This market is traditionally underserved, and Netflix's international user growth has been stronger than in the US, showing that other markets are quite a good target for further growth. Furthermore, Amazon has succeeded in showing sports content on Prime Video, demonstrating that there is potential for other streaming providers in the area. Despite stating in 2018 that it would not broadcast news or sports content, Juniper Research believes Netflix will change this strategy to enable further growth. So who's going to benefit from this? The primary beneficiary from this change will be Netflix themselves, and this is as it seeks to revitalize its own subscriber growth by leveraging growth sources outside of its traditional strategy. By purchasing sports content rights, it will stimulate its growth within its established markets, significantly increasing its value proposition for end users. And this is going to help users as well, who will see really more for their money. By increasing their engagement with users internationally and investment in localized content, Netflix will gain an early mover advantage in these markets. And this is particularly important given how saturated these developed markets are, and that these users are already shelling out really high monthly amounts on services. Now, this saturation is nowhere near as pronounced in developing markets, meaning that there is a strong opportunity. Users will be better served as they will get more content that is relevant to them. This user growth will likely be to the detriment of other streaming services. Indeed, given the intense competition in the market, consolidation in the longer term in the streaming area is pretty much inevitable. Netflix will be well positioned to acquire any streaming services from players exiting the market, which would shore up its market share even further. However, there will likely be regulatory scrutiny of any move in that direction, so that would require pretty careful management. Finally, we predict that these anticipated changes to its core strategy will enable Netflix to return to buoyant user number growth, both inside and outside the US. This growth, plus the strong competition in the market, will drive the overall revenues you see outlined in the chart to the right, showing how valuable this market is. And those themes are explored further in our digital TV and video research suite. So with that, we move on to number 4, which is subscription models to flourish in the games market, but live elements of games to diminish. So really, what we've seen in the games market is that there have been extraordinary changes in recent years, particularly with the types of games available, and the distribution mechanisms have completely changed. The market has changed from primarily physical distribution to predominantly digital. At the same time, content has evolved rapidly, and the fundamental nature of games has changed, centrally around the proposition of monetization and how to achieve ever greater levels of it. This is centered around the concept of games as a service. Now, games as a service has numerous definitions, but it primarily means adding live elements to games which can be monetized, including in-app purchases, DLC, loot boxes, and subscription to individual game elements. The term also refers to subscription distribution models, such as Xbox Game Pass or EA Access. This deployment of games as a service has affected all major publishers. However, these changes have not been broadly welcomed by users. Microtransactions in particular have come in for a lot of criticism from users and the media, as they fundamentally alter game mechanics. Critics have highlighted these elements as pay to win, meaning that users with more disposable income and more willingness to part with it can make much better progress in the game, influencing the design of the game and disadvantaging less affluent users. In addition to this negativity, there's been recent poor reception for some of these live games. Ghost Recon Breakpoint from Ubisoft has in particular struggled with poor reviews and the perceived over-implementation of live elements, along with criticism of other franchises. Concerns around loot boxes already are major, and they've created a negative atmosphere for regulators around the gambling elements. While there has already been regulatory intervention in Europe in particular, there are still concerns that elements such as periodic subscription passes will drive spending from children. And Fortnite has come in for particular criticism in that regard. However, at the same time, the implementation of subscription passes for games has flourished, gaining popularity pretty rapidly, actually. Xbox Game Pass is pretty popular, and that's based on the strong value proposition. Several games are added to the service monthly, and there's a relatively low monthly fee compared to a one-off game purchase, meaning that the value proposition is pretty clear. The same model is replicated in other services, including EA Access, Origin Access, PlayStation Now, and others. As such, we anticipate that in 2020, we'll see the removal of many types of these live services, mainly microtransactions, with more focus on more traditional content and momentum in subscription access models. So why 2020? In recent times, there has been a significant renaissance in single-player games, despite many predictions of their demise. Now, games such as Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order have launched to widespread critical acclaim, and there's other forthcoming games such as The Last of Us Part 2 and Cyberpunk 2077, promising to show the appeal of single-player content going forward. In particular, this will happen in 2020 because publishers who've previously suffered negative reactions will change their approaches in order to reclaim public opinion. And probably in there, we will see Ubisoft and EA. So who's going to benefit from this? There's going to be three main groups. Users will benefit from fewer game-altering microtransactions, which will have a higher quality experience in AAA titles. Subscription models will mean that users will get a much stronger value proposition than that with a traditional one-off purchase. The providers of subscription services will benefit, so Xbox Game Pass and EA Access will offer increased value, and they'll become even more popular in terms of games distribution. The arrival of a new generation of consoles later in 2020 will give vendors the ability to focus on these propositions from day one of the console. Publishers will also benefit from the changes by gaining better relationships with their users, which have become increasingly strained over the past years by all of these monetization mechanisms. So our prediction is that subscription video gaming models will gain traction, but these live elements will diminish. And we expect these changes to ultimately enable valuable recurring revenues in the market for large publishers and subscription platforms. This will also lead to further acquisitions of smaller game studios to create content for subscription services, as can be seen with Microsoft in recent months. And they've been on a strong spree of acquisitions, and they've bolstered their in-house development capabilities. It will also allow for more differentiation of traditional gaming versus mobile gaming, which will enable console and PC gaming to continue driving revenues, despite the increased quality of mobile gaming. And these changes, while broadly positive, will mean that there'll be some consolidation among smaller and mid-level developers and publishers, and will mean that the larger publishers and console manufacturers will remain dominant. Now, with that, it's over to Elson for number 3.
Thanks very much, Nick. And for number 3, we believe open data initiatives will drive MaaS deployments outside of Europe. So what do we see here? Well, we see that mobility as a service, or MaaS, to date, has really been in a pilot phase in Europe, deployed in Helsinki and Stockholm. Although we forecast Western Europe to account for the lion's share at around 80% of the world's number of MaaS users at over 8 million by 2023, that's up from less than 1 million in 2020, we believe further rollouts of MaaS will occur in 2020 outside of Europe, particularly in North America and the Far East and China. So why 2020? Well, many stakeholders in transport and MaaS have learned from initial deployments of MaaS in cities like Helsinki. With a population of 1.4 million, Helsinki has been a global MaaS testbed. It's home to MaaS Global, who is a startup whose WIM app launched in Helsinki on October 2016, and on average has around 60,000 active users per month in Helsinki. Part of WIM's success in terms of adoption has been based on two main key reasons. The first is its ease of use, with options seamlessly integrated into one view. The second is its variety of packages on offer, which include a pay-as-you-go option, a monthly unlimited public transportation option service, and an unlimited package that gives unlimited taxi and car share access. Consequently, partnerships among stakeholders in MaaS are increasing, particularly in the Far East. For example, take Japan, where MaaS Global and Mitsui Fudosan, a Japanese property conglomerate, partnered in April 2019 to launch a proof of concept deployment of the WIM app in Tokyo by end 2019. 2019 also saw another significant MaaS initiative launch, and that is Jelby in Berlin. And this has been identified by some media sources as the world's largest launch of MaaS in Berlin by Berlin's main public transportation company, BVG. Jelby, in summary, integrates 12 types of transport representing each possible way of moving around Berlin, and it aims to decrease the usage of single occupancy cars, trucks, vans, and other vehicles. Travelers using JLB can access trams, trains, ferries, the metro, and utilize shared mobility options. These include bikes, e-kick scooters, e-scooters, shuttles, car sharing, and taxis. Its mobility network also unifies real-time routing data feeds for easy planning and allows the user to choose and pay for a journey that he or she wants to plan to go on. So, who will benefit from open data in MaaS? Well, overall, the beneficiaries of using open data in MaaS deployments will be inhabitants of cities. As MaaS emerges outside of Europe, many advantages will drive its adoption, such as utilizing integrated siloed data sets from different stakeholders in transport. And this, in turn, will benefit travelers and ensure that they receive the best pricing of travel routes, the best travel route options, and the least amount of time spent traveling. Using open data initiatives in MaaS will crucially help to address environmental concerns as well, such as reducing carbon emissions. Carbon emissions have risen in the past 40 years, despite several international agreements, which have aimed at reducing these emissions and promoting the use of fuel-efficient vehicles. We expect MaaS initiatives to be explored by technologically advanced cities such as Tokyo and Seoul in 2020. And these cities at times do suffer from high carbon emissions at certain times. The US as well relies heavily on private car usage for transportation. However, as the population of cities in the US increases, transport patterns are likely to alter, and this increases the importance of implementing MaaS initiatives to cope with increasing numbers of travelers in the US. Clearly, MaaS deployments must be extremely responsive to the demands of travelers by supplying reliable, accurate travel information. Clearly here, open data will help drive that transformation in MaaS and contribute to the efficiency of moving people around cities through multimodal, multi-sector transportation options. Clearly, open data sharing here by transport providers and transit authorities, combined with partnerships with ride planning apps to a certain demand, will prove vital to ensuring the longevity of MaaS operations. Some transit organizations have enforced open data sharing by mandating that transport companies, such as those in the UK, share their data with passengers to inform them of real-time information on routes, timetables, and tariffs, and so forth, to make certain that travelers are updated with relevant info regardless of their geographical location. Take the UK, for example. UK bus operators Arriva and Go Ahead have enabled real-time bus data to be easily fed into Google Maps as a step in this direction. And thus we foresee the sharing of open real-time data collated on transportation conditions heavily benefiting small cities that firstly often lack a digital transportation or MaaS plan, and two, have a weak ability to aggregate data. The only major kind of thing to bear in mind here is that governments and transportation organizations should risk the potential risk of sharing data with the public openly. And now over to you, Sam, who will reveal the top 2 trends for 2020.
Thank you, Elson. Our next top 10 tech trend is that OTT advertising stakeholders will develop functional attribution ecosystems. Given the large sums in the digital advertising industry, advertisers are looking for new channels in which they can engage with digital users. However, in order to foster confidence in the OTT TV advertising ecosystem, stakeholders must implement correct attribution processes. And the failure to do so will lead to inaccurate attribution of ads, meaning that advertisers will not be able to measure the impact of their advertising campaigns over smart or connected TVs. Given the large number of expected OTT service users in 2020, 760 million shown to the right, Juniper Research believes that the delivery of live video content via connected TVs, including social media channels, is set to grow. This will be down to users increasing the volume of live broadcast content posted to these platforms, as well as these social media platforms acquiring the rights to broadcast third-party content over their own digital channels. To date, several popular social media providers have sought to promote such content, including Facebook, which offers its live feature, encouraging users to broadcast live video to their friends and followers. In fact, Juniper Research believes that this live video element will become an increasingly important strategy for social media providers as they seek to capitalize on the growing user base of smart TV users. As a result, we expect smart TVs to be integrated into the wider digital advertising ecosystem. However, the connected TV has one significant drawback. The device does not currently support many of the calls to action that other devices such as smartphones, tablets, and desktop PCs are able to do, and this limits the scope for the immediate engagement with the digital ads. Additionally, the supply of advertising media inventory in the wider digital advertising ecosystem currently exceeds the demand for it. As a result, what we're seeing is that this excess supply being filled by fraudulent advertising traffic, which provides no value or any return on advertising spend. However, as the OTT advertising ecosystem develops and the increasing amounts of advertising budgets are allocated to this device, we expect the level of fraud to develop too as fraudsters follow the money. This places increasing importance on the necessity of an industry-wide standard in order to enable this greater degree of transparency between the industry stakeholders, which include the advertisers, the publishers, attribution platforms, and anti-fraud solutions. And this transparency is essential to fight any rising ad fraud. So Juniper Research believes these processes must become established in 2020 in order to succeed, and a failure to do so will not be able to attract the high-spending advertisers that we see in other areas of the digital advertising ecosystem. Given this proposed market shift, it's important to note who will benefit the most. The biggest beneficiaries will, of course, be the advertisers themselves. This would open them up to an increased advertising media inventory, allowing them to reach digital users through a new channel in addition to smartphones, tablets, and PCs. While this has been the case for some time, the value of advertising over smart TVs has been limited, as OTT advertising lacks standards for accurate cross-device advertising attribution. This cross-device attribution is essential to attracting advertisers to the platform. Additionally, OTT service providers would also benefit from the increased ad spend over their TV apps and content. Service providers would also be able to explore advertising as a potential new revenue stream rather than the dominant subscription model we see today. We also believe that the biggest beneficiaries will be social media platforms, as this enables these players to distribute their content to TVs rather than just smartphones and PCs. However, this standardization needs to focus on three key areas. Firstly, devices. This would allow advertising attribution platforms to monitor where these ads are being delivered. Secondly, ad impressions, which would allow the advertising journey of each ad impression to be followed closely. Therefore, any call to action can be traced back to relevant ads. And thirdly, users. This is where the value of the attribution platforms lie for the market. This allows advertisers to identify ads placed across multiple devices, thus ensuring that an ad being displayed on one device can be linked to a call to action from the same user on a different device. This is essential for advertising over smart and connected TVs, as the device's functionality often lacks that functionality for call to action. Whilst this may be viewed as mirroring the wider digital advertising ecosystem, it can be more accurately described as OTT TV advertising being fully integrated into the existing attribution processes. Over 2020, we anticipate the majority of ad spend over OTT services will be located in the Americas and Europe. And indeed, there is already a high usage of smart TVs and services in these regions, providing the perfect platform for new OTT services to be launched. Given the relatively low barrier to entry in launching or modifying a service over these channels, we fully expect an increase in ad spend to occur. However, given the popularity of platforms including Netflix, Amazon Video, and Hulu, it should be noted that this content must be original in order to attract new users. And moving on to our top 10 tech trend for 2020, last mile fiber rollouts will be replaced by 5G connectivity. Fibre rollouts, while costly, are necessary to the delivery of wireless networks that serve data-intensive services. Current networking services, including fibre to the cabinet and LTE networks, are unable to provide the ultra-fast internet speeds that can be delivered. The LTE networks often provide network speeds of approximately 30 megabits per second to 50 megabits per second, however this can vary. And the peak data rates for a 5G system are expected to be higher than 10 gigabits, but more importantly, the cell edge data rate which covers 95% of users, should be around 100 megabits per second. And this will allow mobile internet to be a more reliable replacement for cable when needed. And for clarity, fibre to the cabinet provides fibre from the exchange. However, copper is used from the cabinet to the premises, thus reducing the final network speed delivered to the user. However, ultra-fast network speeds are being enabled by fibre to the premises. This is where the fibre runs all the way from the network exchange to the premises, normally to the back of the router. And fibre rollouts, whilst costly for network operators, often don't justify a return on investment in areas close to the further away from the network core. And as a result, in order to offer ultra-fast broadband services, fibre to the premises can often be essential. However, in some areas, offering full fibre is not viable as there is no clear path to return on investment. And we believe that 5G technology provide a viable and more cost-effective alternative to fibre rollouts in 2020. Firstly, the first commercial 5G networks were launched in 2019, providing the high network throughput and bandwidth that was promised during the time spent in trials and testing. Therefore, we believe that 5G will be increasingly implemented as an alternative to fibre rollouts in areas where these fibre rollouts are deemed too costly. And this will drastically reduce the cost for operators whilst providing the similar bandwidth and latency to the end user. Now, this is especially true for instances in providing fibre to the property, commonly called the last mile, and given a clear lack of return on investment for service providers in less densely populated areas. In 2020, operators will look to launch 5G in areas previously underserved by fibre connectivity or in areas where fibre rollouts were considered unviable. And in turn, this will also free up funding for telecommunications bodies such as FCC in the US and Ofcom in the UK. So who stands to benefit from these rollouts? First and foremost, internet service providers will be able to offer internet connectivity in areas that were previously unable to do so. This will be in rural areas that are currently underserved by fibre, or in instances where fibre to the property offers that no return on investment. We believe that this market shift will provide mobile network operators with the opportunity to play a more prominent role in the provision of fixed wireless access broadband services. Indeed, operators will own the entire network for 5G fixed wireless access, including the exchange, the fibre, and the base stations. And as a result, we expect operators to become market leaders in offering ultra-fast broadband services in these underserved areas. It must also be noted that those consumers who are unable to receive ultra-fast broadband previously will also be able to benefit from 5G fixed wireless access. So how do we anticipate these services to evolve over 2020? Firstly, we should see operators investing into increasing the geographical coverage of their networks as a priority in order to attract new customers. And from an operator's point of view, these areas must focus in areas that can grow its 5G user base quickly. And we anticipate that operators' initial focus will remain on coverage in urban areas and in areas where this fibre connectivity is underserved. Leading 5G regions, including North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific, are all likely to focus on these areas as fixed wireless access becomes a completely new potential revenue stream for operators. And as this coverage increases over 2020, we believe that ensuring that a 5G-based fixed wireless access service is able to compete with fibre services and will be essential to enabling any operator-led services to gain traction. A failure to do so will lead to consumers abandoning the prospect of broadband services underpinned by 5G networks entirely. And back over to you, Nick.
Great, thank you, Sam. And now that wraps up our top 10 tech trends and predictions for 2020. Now, before we move on, let's just have a recap of the rankings. So right at the top, we discussed how voice assistants security concerns will come to a head, causing trouble for smart homes, as well as consumer robots to launch using subscription models. This was followed by the Huawei ban, leading to more uneven 5G network growth, as well as Google leveraging Fitbit's health credentials to mount a challenge to Apple Watch. At number 6, we had Google to expand RCS services in Europe, followed by Netflix to seek out new sources of revenue growth as competition rises. At number 4, we explained how subscription models are going to flourish in the games market, but live elements of games will diminish. With number 3 discussing how open data in transportation will drive MaaS beyond Europe. At 2 and 1, we discussed how OTT TV advertising stakeholders will develop functional attribution ecosystem and how last mile fibre rollouts will be replaced by 5G connectivity. So we've got a I think we've got time only for one question. So I think this is most relevant to you, Sam. Given the prevalence of the subscription model in connected TV services, is there much motivation to start leveraging advertising as a monetization model in the future?
I think it's a very good question. Firstly, it's quite obvious that the subscription model has dominated over the last few years for services in that sector. And mainly it's because of advertising not being able to be attributed properly, and the processes essentially not up to what advertisers are used to over other digital platforms. So from the point of view of a service provider today, you may see new service providers come in with leveraging an advertising model, essentially no cost to the end user. You may also see some established service providers today essentially offering a freemium model, the ability to come in with advertising for free and then offering another tier whereby you pay for a subscription service. But again, that must be down to advertisers and the ecosystem being able to attribute ads properly. A failure to do so is going to really diminish that motivation.
Okay, thank you very much for that explanation, Sam. So that brings us to the end of our webinar. There are a few people who have left questions in the chat box, so we will be in touch with you after the webinar via email. That brings us to the end of the webinar. I hope you found this very insightful. We'll make a recording of this available on our YouTube channel and on our website, following which we will publish an more in-depth white paper, which will analyze and break down these trends a bit more for you. Once again, please download the related reports from our website, and if you need any further assistance, you can contact us on the contact details provided here. Once again, thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure for all of us, and goodbye for now. Thank you very much.